Welcome to episode 4 of The Garden of Earthly Blights. I'm Luisa, a resident nymph in the garden and loving caretaker of Toni Quadri's creation, alongside my co-host, Reece. This episode is the release of the last recording we did with our dear Toni, where we discussed the relationship between artificial intelligence and human creativity. The idea for this theme came at the early stages of the podcast around August 2023, when we were giving shape to our visual identity and decided to play around with some AI-generated images. This raised so many juicy questions that echo a lot of relevant debates around AI at the moment. So let's get into it. If you're even remotely into art, it's likely you've recently been bombarded with apocalyptic-sounding headlines such as, "What is AI doing to art? Is AI coming for your job? Is AI a threat? Is creativity dead? Is AI the end of art?" Or on the opposite side of the spectrum, is AI the answer to all creative blocks? Is it the ultimate solution to accessibility in art making? These are all fascinating questions with so much nuance to be unpacked. Our podcast was inspired by the idea of looking at humanity beyond good and evil, and perhaps today we can do the same with machines. Because debates around creativity, originality, authenticity, and even using an artist's work without their consent are not exactly new. Sure, it's hard to trace AI-generated images back to the original creator, but it's also hard to know more about the people working in Da Vinci's or Michelangelo's workshops and what they contributed to each artwork. To use more contemporary examples, who are the people making the hundreds of Yayoi Kusama's pumpkins? Even the backlash against computers making art seems to ignore the fact that art has incorporated digital technologies and computers for a very long time, and that these technologies have changed the way we think about the world more broadly. How could it not impact art? Must we extend the mythical aura we've historically placed around human artists onto AI? Like, instead of the genius artist, you have the genius machine ready to take over the world. It's funny how so much of popular culture anthropomorphizes AI, that is, turns it into a human in shape and form, and suggests that it has agency and autonomy. This can create an intimidating and even threatening aura around AI, which I don't think serves us. The whole thing reminds me of what this anthropologist Alfred Gell said about art. We're gonna get academic here for a moment, but stay with me. He has a famous text called The Technology of Enchantment and the Enchantment of Technology. It's a mouthful, but basically what he suggests is that the effect produced by a work of art, what he calls enchantment or the feeling of awe when you encounter an artwork, is created by virtue of not knowing how it's made. He says that it is the way an art object is construed as having come into the world, as opposed to having been made, which is the source of power such objects have over us. So, not understanding the processes that lead to an artwork being created give it a kind of magical effect. And not the magic of feeling connected to a human story or empathizing with a feeling translated into an artwork, but distant, impenetrable, intimidating magic. Not understanding how marble can be made to look like human flesh by a sculptor, for example, and then thinking you can't be an artist because you couldn't possibly do that. This example refers, of course, to like a classical Western art canon, but that's kind of my point. Because especially in the Western world, our ideas around creativity are obsessed with this myth of the genius white male artist with a God-given innate talent destined for greatness. That's why Alfred Gell in the 90s said that anthropologists needed to disown the art cult to study art, so remove the enchantment so they could look at it critically. Very well, today we shall aim to do something similar. We want to question the projection of this halo effect around technical difficulty onto AI. We want to disenchant machine learning technologies so we can get a more nuanced view of the relationship between AI and human creativity. So in this episode, we enlisted the help of our incredibly esteemed and inimitable first guest, Esther Mulwa. Esther is a PhD candidate at the Artificial Intelligence Research Center at City University London. She works on integrating associative learning models and deep neural networks, which she'll touch on and explain better than I ever could. She calls herself both an engineer and an artist, which makes her the perfect company for this journey of thinking about the intersections between the technological and the artistic. So get ready for a 2-part episode where we discuss everything from the basics of how AI works to the complex ways in which it interacts with our lived realities, spanning from ethics to aesthetics. We will occasionally refer to the painting The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch, which has both figurative and literally been the background to our conversation, and the AI images we created from it. So head over to Blighted Garden on Instagram for the visual aids. It was a pleasure to spiral down this rabbit hole together, and we hope you will enjoy joining us for this.
So yeah, behind us we're projecting The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. And he painted this in like the 16th century-ish. It's a triptych that kind of opens out. So first it's like doors with the moon painted on it, or the earth actually. I think it might be the earth. And it's just in black and white, and then you open it and it's like this prismatic, ginormous, colourful painting. And it's just complete chaos. Like at first it's gorgeous and it looks like the Garden of Eden. You can see Adam and Eve, but the more you look, the more you kind of discover that it's not all as it seems. And there are like orgies happening, and people who are half birds, and people crawling out of eggs, and ears with scissors on them. It's like insane. And that is kind of the place that I want this podcast to come from. It's seeing something beautiful, discovering the corrupt bits of it, but still appreciating it. Because that's life, isn't it? Yeah. It's beautiful, but it's also terrifying and scary and ugly. And yeah, this podcast is about embracing all sides of life, all sides of culture, all sides of art. And yeah, Garden of Earthly Blights, I decided to change it from Delights because, a blight is like a disease, I guess. Yeah. And yeah, again, it's just hinging on that idea of the ugly and the beauty, and the beauty and the ugly. And yeah, we're just looking at what it's like to be a person right now at the end of history, just hurtling into the future. So yeah, that is the Garden of Earthly Blights. Thank you so much for coming. You're our first ever guest. We're so excited.
And such an honor.
Yeah.
I think that leads us to our first question, which is, how does an AI image generator interpret an image? What has it been told to reproduce? Color, texture, shapes? Or does it also have a way of gathering information about context and style?
Good question. I guess from like a machine learning point of view, we have to get like a very clear understanding what these models do. Obviously, they pass through the hands of developers, engineers, and I myself am an engineer, and what normally happens in a generative AI model is that you will build a model which is just a mathematical system and train it with a lot of images. And by this, I mean you build like some probabilistic equations, and they will read your image and have like certain parameters. That's basically how you get a generative system producing art that is labeled as creative. So I'll break this down and say that there's definitely some parameters that are built around these models, and they allocate some context known as affordances. Yeah. For instance, if I give you an egg, what are you going to do with the egg? Naturally, like from a perception point of view, you either break the egg or hold it in a very gentle way. And basically that's how they build these models, and you trained it with so many images of either someone breaking an egg, either someone making like scrambled eggs, either someone buying eggs from the shop. And once the model sees this many images, then it has context around it. Yeah. And art is not only on images, it's also on the captions that you train your model with on the images. Some of these captions provide context. Some of the audio, I don't know, clips, they provide also context. Basically, in a nutshell, I would say that's how like the generative mechanisms work, but it does not necessarily replace the human element, because remember that this is basically the most artificial brain you'll ever see. Yeah, what AI is bringing in the picture is just simplifying the mechanistic point of creativity by just feeding this model with so many all imaginable possible scenarios. It doesn't really necessarily replace, but I'd say it's somehow maybe makes it easier and faster for people to access information that would have otherwise taken like a long period of time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so many things. I have a couple of questions, but I want to check if either of you want to ask anything first.
So you said that the AI reads the image?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Okay, so reading an image is, the way I would easily describe it is you basically have these models known as convolution neural networks, and they're just simple algebraic equations. Yeah, so models, when you hear model, it's not like a back end machine that's working somewhere. It's basically a computer. Someone has written code on a computer that's going to do a very simple operation. Yeah. So for this convolution neural networks, you feed it with like arrays of numbers that are known as filters. So how the model reads the image, you will definitely feed the pixels to the computer, and then now it will just do like a plus, like a summation operation, where now if in this image of my hand, I will extract things like, I'd say like edges, texture, and I don't know, color, and the models can show you can visualize how you get to a perfect image. Yeah. So at the beginning of it's a hierarchical layer. So at the very base, you just see like sticks and edges and like some just funny shapes.
Yeah.
And then as you go
up
the
texture,
so you incorporate the texture, it becomes more fine, and then now you reduce that to form now an abstraction of what your image kind of looks like. Yeah. So if you go much into the detail of it, the more filters you give it, the more it will extract from this image, and you'd have like very subtle features of what entails or what makes up that image. Yeah. Because now if you look at the science behind it, the neurological aspects of it is, you kind of ask yourself, okay, so how does my brain sort of like configure and encode what I see? Yeah. And it just learns the same way with how these models have been built, where you learn certain representations. Yeah. As a child, you learned that if I hit this, I'll feel pain. Yeah. But later on, as you developed, then you were taught that this is a table. But how you encoded the information of a table is through feel, through play, through texture, and that's basically how the brain works. Yeah. So you build that into now this whole artificial intelligence models. Although it's very limited, you cannot compare with how the brain works, because as you know, according to science, nobody actually understands fully how the brain really works. Yeah. But if I can come up with like an equation that would estimate that if I have a picture of this image and I feed it through my code, then I will extract some features and it will still give me that this is actually a table. Yeah.
It's super interesting, and the more you were talking about it, earlier you mentioned bias and we don't understand the brain and all that. So I studied psychology, and when they were teaching us, I remember even at sixth form they were saying in cognitive psychology, the way that we understand how the brain works is very, very similar to a computer. The brain is basically just turned into a computer, and the way we process it's similar. I guess I don't know what came first, the brain or the computer. It feels like in this discussion, obviously the brain, but well, maybe not. But it's easy to understand it in that way if you turn the computer into a brain, and that's sort of what you were talking about, where you anthropomorphize AI and you give it that human nature. But it is because it is kind of in a way easy to understand it as a brain. But something I wanted to pick up on was the bias that you mentioned. I'm interested to know you have the pattern recognition of AI and it gives you a probability of what this thing that it's seeing might be. But when it's being encoded, it's obviously being coded by a person. And so I would assume that the bias of that person would get put in. So if you were feeding an image a prompt, you might say, feeding an AI like a prompt of an image, you might say a glass of water next to an apple against a black background, and maybe whatever you suggest to it first, it creates that to be the focus. So if you said an apple with a glass next to it, it might be an apple in the middle of the glass, or if you said the glass first, the glass might be in the middle. So that's kind of bias I'm thinking of. How does that work? Does AI have that bias of the creator or coder, or does it kind of generate its own bias sometimes?
I think with technology having come from such a long period of time, people have managed to capture what bias is. So one thing to counteract bias from an AI point of view is there's something known as shuffling, where whenever you're training your model, you don't necessarily follow the same sequence of information all the time, because training is you do it as many times as possible until you get like reasonable weights, where if you feed it like a new unseen data, then it will categorize it well. So in this case, you train it, but you shuffle the data. The other thing is you have methodologies where you sometimes in some layers you shut down that particular layer so that it doesn't
take the same
follow
path.
Follow the same path. So you end up with models that perform very well, but they're not as biased as much. So I think with enough information and enough data and how you train your model, then you can counteract some of this bias, but then also getting feedback from people who are using the app can really tell you, okay, maybe it's kind of biased and you need to adjust some of the parameters so that the model is fair. And
I guess in a way it's interesting because when you think of AI or like the mystified AI, it's like it's this outer force and it's got its own agenda sometimes, or it learns so much that it creates its own personality or something like that. But it is that, but it doesn't have that extra level, which I think is like the
human edge.
It is that human edge, because you can have so many human minds within an AI program, and that's how you get it to be less biased, by having all of these minds within it at once. So it's like what you were saying, like creating the neural pathways. When you learn things, you learn that something with 4 legs and a flat surface is a chair. That's a connection that's been made in your mind. But you might see something that looks so similar to that, and your snap judgment is to say that's a chair. But the AI might think, well, I've been told all of these things that have 4 legs and a flat surface, it's going to be something else. Exactly. So it wouldn't make that snap judgment if you gave it such like basic information. Obviously, the more information you give, the more detail. But
and some of the classification problems that we have are not like fully accurate. Because you have cases where your model is performing at like 89%. So what happens to the 11% that's there? That's the reason why in as much as you have a very good model, you still have like some human intervention at the end of the day clarify some
Quality
of these
check.
things. Yeah, and a good example would be if you're signing up in a new website, Google will still ask you which of these images is.
Yeah.
What's that for?
That's the
actually?
human check. Yeah, and
Okay.
to sort of like now classify things, and in your phone, if it's like an iPhone, you probably give it labels and say that these are the photos of me, or these are the photos of like a certain person. So you're literally just helping it classify, and it will give you randomly at some point like, hey, can you actually confirm whether this is the same person? So you're literally just training the model,
Yeah, it's true.
but now validating it with a human element.
Yeah.
What I'm curious about is the kind of implication of language. Obviously, language is innately human, and with coding, we call it language. And I think at least the majority of codes I've seen, it's like based on the English language. But what happens when, how do I say, like different cultures have words that are untranslatable. So like in Portuguese there's saudade. And like in English there's no way of communicating that. So, or at least not in like one word. Are there like almost blind spots in AI, and are those blind spots kind of like irrecuperable unless a new programming language based on Portuguese is created?
Yeah, I think for like language basically it's a difficult area for AI because one, you have different dictions, you have different translations. So what happens in such scenarios is you need to have like natives of a given country, different languages, and you're feeding this model audio. Yeah, so most of the models right now, they've all been trained using like proper English, and there's still some scenarios where you hear a word and you're like, oh, that's not that's not how it's pronounced, that's not how you say it. So you need to have someone who understands the language, but now same models, but you just train it using their language.
Okay.
And it's not really like a programming language, because the programming language is very structured and very, let's say, general. Yeah. So what we want is to get information from the data, which is now in audio form.
Okay.
So if you learn the structure of the data, if you learn how you pronounce the data, if you learn how you say certain words, then translation is not such a huge problem, because you easily get like a certain word and then now it translates it. But now the way you pronounce it, the way you mimic how locals, now that's like an audio issue, which is a different it's a different data set that needs to be worked on.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a question related to this issue of agency and neutrality, the biases that are involved in the technology. I think a lot of the discussions about AI have related it to the moment of photography emerging and photography being made to seem like it removed human flaws, right? It could be perfectly accurate, even though that's not true. Like the first photograph, for example, shows a completely empty boulevard because the exposure time was so long that it couldn't actually capture the people who were there only for a little while. But yet with time, we started to see that the technology, of course, carries the biases of its creators. So photography, for example, for the longest time was more accurate at depicting lighter skin tones than darker ones. Similarly, with AI, I've been reading about how a lot of the data sets are mainly European art, which creates then kind of Eurocentric focused images. So I wanted to ask, how do we account for the lack of comprehensive data sets, or how can we make them more comprehensive in terms of generating images? Because obviously for an artist, for a human artist, the data set is everything they've ever experienced, they've ever encountered. So I wonder if, I mean, an AI that is trying to reproduce what that artist's style is like instead of feeding off of the images that that artist has already produced? Wouldn't it be more accurate if it was feeding off of the same data set as the artist?
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, that's not one question. I realize now there's like 3 things in there, but you start wherever you want if you want.
Yeah.
I can change it too.
I think again we go back to, if I build your intelligence only on a certain data, those are the bounds where you will learn, and I think it's up to engineers and leaders in some of these organizations to diversify the data set. Yeah, because if you want your AI model to be as creative, as inclusive, as full representation on all spheres, then I think you have to expose it to as much data as possible. Yeah, and I think there has been a lot of conversation from the art side of world together with AI. So how do we plug in? How do we contribute to AI, which seems to be doing things, in a very mechanistic way without the human element, or without incorporating some of the realities that we as artists have. So, and it's contribution from the society and from creatives from all spheres. And I think that would definitely propel creativity from an AI point of view forward.
I was reading about these museum collections and cultural heritage institutions trying to make their collection images part of data sets to train, which was a bit surreal for me to consider, because digitizing a collection is already such a huge issue. Like, people can barely put it on a simple website. Imagine
and if there's no, and I think that's where now also ethics comes into play, and copyright and all that. Yeah, so traditionally from these industries, you don't make such data public. It's like making your health data public, and you can imagine how much harm people can do with your health data set. So it's the same way with digitizing some of this data and making it public, because if it's not there, then you end up with AI that's not really a good representation of what you really want. So then again, a matter of very sensitive issues when it comes to ethics, policy, and what's really acceptable, what can we do, what's private data, and how do we protect the originality of creators in the industry. Yeah, because you question now from a very policy and ethical point of view. So is AI really authentic? Because it's using all this information from everywhere just to learn structure and to learn very many environments that surround your data, and use that to create something. Yeah, so there's a question of, is that really original? Yeah,
I mean, are humans really authentic and original?
Yeah. And same too. If you flip the coin, you're like, okay, it's really a question of, so what's authenticity and originality at the end of the day? Yeah.
I really feel like human beings need to just get over this idea of originality and of truth. We were saying how it's important to have kind of a diverse range of, I don't know, not just prompts, but the people giving the prompts, in order to create an AI without bias. But there's not a human being on the planet, there's not a natural intelligent on the planet without bias. And why do we need or want a kind of technology that can be biasless, that can attain the truth in that sense? Because none of us can. And I think that's kind of the point of being a human being. It's social. To me, I think it's a curse of romanticism. I think ever since, Shelley and Keats and Wordsworth, kind of came around and said that, you know, art comes from the soul, and, you know, it's just me experiencing and then giving it back to the world, and this is my truth. And it's completely, I think, at least for Western art, I cannot speak for the rest of the world, it's completely like thrown us along this kind of journey that we're still on, of believing that human beings can be the origins of anything. We are all, I mean, what did Newton say? Energy is not created or destroyed. We're all just reiterations of atoms from, I don't even know, billions is not even a big enough word, but, you know, a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Nothing about us, our experience, what we can do, what we're about to do is original, and that's fine. I don't know what this like obsession is with authenticity and truth. I think it's okay to be subjective, and it's okay to kind of be blinded by your own body experience. That's like the point, in my opinion.
I mean, that's where the uniqueness would
come from. Yeah. How can we but that being said, I feel like you also can't say that art created by AI is not original in the sense of interesting and new, because it certainly is interesting and new.
Yeah.
And my brain's like going at like I'm just
this
like
tends to happen with this topic.
Yeah, so it's just insane.
To me, it seems like it feels like all roads lead to capitalism, but it seems like it is stemming from capitalism. The idea to have concise and like when you talk about why do things need to be original, all of that, people want their creative like license on something. They want to say that this was me, I did this, because at some point I might capitalize off of this. And that's why I think you find that more with music, and people have their creative like license, and they say this is mine, like if you use this in a song I'm going to copyright claim you, things like that, because it's, you know, you don't want to be making money off work that I've put time and effort into. And I think we made a mistake allowing AI to enter the creative sphere in some senses, not all, but I think it should have been kept for learning. It should have been kept for like automating jobs that we can do but don't need to be done because they're menial, things like that. I think the only thing I can think of right now is sort of like doctors, and when you're diagnosing, you put your symptoms in and it tells you this is probably what you have. But even that has issues, because I remember reading something about the bias of that and it being racist. These softwares came out to be racist, and when people were putting their symptoms in, they put their where they came from, their blood type, all things like that, and it ended up mimicking racist stereotypes and things, saying that, you know, black women have a higher tolerance for pain, and so they don't need to be administered this medication because they'll be fine on their own. And that's why there was the whole thing about wait times of black women in hospitals taking longer to be seen because their pain was dismissed by doctors because they've been told that they can handle the pain, especially women as well in general, having a higher pain threshold. So they say, well, your pain, you can handle it. And so
it's such a human thing to like. We've created something without eyes that's also racist.
And we've given it racism.
That's insane.
Yeah. So you can see like the problem with having it merge into the creative sphere is that it takes away that like sense of accomplishment and someone being like, I did this, I put time into it. And if you can have work that just does that immediately and it's still original, that's like, okay, well, why should I bother then? Because, you know, it is formed of the same. If you gave a computer the same prompts that a person had from their entire life, they could create work that person might one day create, but in an instant, and it's not impressive anymore because it didn't take time or effort, and you don't have to go out and buy the pen and paper or the paint or whatever. And so it's, I don't know, and also the fallibility of humans as well, that makes it, that's another layer to it, because, you know, mistakes, they create new creative divergences and paths and stuff like that, and you can learn from those. And AI, that we're training it to not make those mistakes anymore, and especially if you do go down the medical route, you hope it doesn't make those mistakes. So I think there are two different discussions between creativity and learning, and they're blurring a bit too much, because, you know, you can allow AI to have creative freedom or make mistakes or copy when you're doing art, but when it's something as strict as medicine, it needs to be it needs to have rules and guidelines and boundaries, and it needs to be unbiased, and that's how I see it. And yeah, just going back to the capitalism thing, that's kind of why people need it to be sort of set out and have the ownership of it, is so that they can potentially use it for capitalistic gain later on.
Yeah. I was thinking about this in the whole discussion of like, why are we letting AI do all the fun stuff and we're getting the shit tasks? But I think it's because our first instinct is to kind of play with it like a toy and want to be creative with it. But the one part of the process of being creative is sometimes hitting
like a block.
Yeah, hitting a block, like looking at the page, not knowing where to go. And then often, and I found this with whatever it is that I'm creating, most often text. You just need to trust that it will come at one point, that it will come, that your like subconscious will feed you somehow this information. Of course, I think AI can come in handy and be like a prompt for someone's creativity, but yeah, will that spark any connections that aren't obvious? Perhaps not, because of fallibility and chance and all of the things that even through technology a lot of artists have been trying to include into artworks. So the two clocks, for example, that are next to each other, and you would expect them to be constantly on the same time, but then one is not. I think it's quite an interesting metaphor in relation to that. But I agree. I think the socioeconomic system that we're involved in definitely dictates how this technology can be used and what like ethical implications there are.
The article you sent us, Luisa, the one that is kind of looking at the introduction of AI into creative spaces and photography, I thought, you know what, AI's implications can be really exciting, because it said something about how, you know, in the same way that photography kind of took away the manual processes of like image reproduction. So before you need a draftsman to draw a country estate, now you can just take a picture. Allows for higher level creativity. I was like, first of all, what does that mean? And then second of all, the fact that we don't know what that means, isn't that so exciting? Because if you think about art in the 19th century and before, people were painting themselves, or like cows or meadows. Like it was just things, it was just visual representations. But with the reproductions, thank you, darling. But with the kind of development of technological processes in the creative spaces, people are now drawing. I mean, you've got like Jackson Pollock and Marcel Duchamp. Then, you know, things go a step further, and you've got like CGI movies, and like, what am I trying to say? In the same way that we've gone from drawing just like everyday stuff to things that just couldn't possibly exist, where is that next step going? I think that is such an exciting implication.
I see what you mean, but I don't know if it's that linear, perhaps, because I was thinking a lot about, to go back to the Bosch work, I was thinking about the AI images that are generated from that. I'll pull those up. So I think this is a particularly interesting work because I would connect it to a more contemporary, like, oh, we no longer need to be stuck with just being accurate. We can be a bit more creative. This work is crazy. Like, nothing is configured the way you would expect it to be, the original one. So when you see the AI generated image, it's almost like the unpredictability of it or the absurdity of it is lost on you, because the original work from the 16th century is already so absurd. So yeah, I think it might not be that linear, and I worry about the kind of idealization of Western modernism and this very sharp like division of high and low art and craft being put completely outside of art with a capital A. But I think there are definitely exciting implications, and one of the articles I was reading was about like how artists can be in dialogue with AI, or they can feed their own works to an AI tool and say, can you identify a style that is very recurring and changes I could make to it, or like have some kind of creative dialogue with AI, which seems a lot more interesting than just having it create an image and react to the image. But I think that was one of the most exciting things I've heard about. But yeah, I just wanted to address the kind of technology freezes to try things that are less accurate, because we've also been playing with inaccuracies and absurdity for a very long time. That's how it makes sense. My brain is also going in every direction. But yeah, these are the AI generated images, and they've kind of just kept the like general shapes, tones, kind of the landscape configuration of the work, but similarly to the original work, when you look at it, it all looks kind of familiar, and then when you zoom in, you're like, oh, this makes no sense.
But these pieces, whatever you want to call them, are they're biased, but like it's heavy on my bias, because what I really like about the original work was the spheres, and I remember putting spheres specifically.
Okay, because that's
the prompt.
Yeah. Okay.
So like, even I don't know, something about my experiences and my subconscious likes blue spheres, and I fed that to the AI.
So it's funny how it's kind of kept the layout and the
color blocking.
Yeah, the color blocking,
it's like
the composition,
the hierarchy. Like, it's definitely kept the the composition, the lines. They've all been maintained, and they even managed to like figure out why the color is. Yeah, that's what I thought was interesting. Like, how they know, like they. How, like, for me, an artist's style is just as, or the way they use composition is as important as the lines they use, the medium they use, the color. For me, color is a big one. And surely an AI does not see color in the way that a human does, in that I guess we can teach an AI that red means hot, but as far as it's concerned, like, color is like #0345 whatever, right? You think
it's okay, we're here to debunk the myth.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How does an AI see color?
I mean, color, your image is a composition of different colors, right? So the way an image is defined from a digital space is you have these containers or arrays of numbers, because the color ranges between 0 and 255. That's from 0 being like black, and then 255 being white, or the other way around. And then you have 3 channels. You have R, G, and B. So an image, if I have this particular image, the way I would read it from your laptop to my computer, it will be in the form of its width and height, which maybe is a 28 by 28, but then it's defined in 3 channels, where you have a combination of the red channels, the blue and the green. So, and then from that, I extract the edges and the corners and everything. So that's basically how an image is read. So color is literally what makes up your your abstract detail about these images, and it's part of the features, and it will be extracted. So when I'm creating, I'll create towards those features. Yeah, something similar to that. Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, yes, I understand, but not. I can't picture it happening. You know what I mean?
Too dumb for my own podcast.
No, stop. That is so not true.
You've now reached the end of the first part of this episode. We hope you'll tune in for part 2, and in the meantime, join us on Instagram at Blighted Garden, where we'll be continuing this conversation that, as you can tell, is so multidimensional. We hope you've enjoyed it so far, and thank you so much for listening.